welcome to another episode of the Empowered Half Hour. And I have a fellow podcast friend of mine, Robert Kuang, here. And Robert is a writer, a coach, and a musician, which is all things right after my own heart.
Yeah.
And currently, Robert is really in the space of supporting writers, coaching writers on their journey to get their story out and get it out now while they still have the chance. There's the saying, don't let the music die in you or whatever.
Yeah.
Don't let your story die in you. So anyway, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Becca. It's really nice to be catching up with you again. I was just mentioning before we started recording, it feels like many lifetimes since we last caught up, even though it was like right before
6 months ago or something.
It was like right before the holidays, and catching up now is sometimes you wonder like, oh, are we going to talk about the same things? But no, we are in the new year for sure.
Yeah. New world has started.
Yeah.
So I loved when we chatted on your podcast. So I want to bring this into my listeners, is this thing about being multifaceted. Like you and I really connected on that. And I just love, even in your title, that it's the three things. I'm such a big advocate of embracing the and. And I know right now you're even bridging that the coaching and the writing. So let's start there. What's the backstory to kind of where you're focusing your energy right now?
My passion for writing and music and coaching actually go back quite a number of years. Although writing is probably one of my oldest friends, I like to say.
Me too. I'm like,
yeah.
When I first could start writing, 5 or 6 years old. I don't know.
Yeah, especially compared to something like coaching. These are very early things I connected with, similar to you. I grew up, my mom taught Mandarin Chinese in China when we were living there. So she was like a language arts teacher, and my dad studied and classically trained as a Chinese opera singer. And so I always say now that maybe earlier on, I felt like, wow, I don't feel like I have that much in common with my family and da-da-da. And then I learned all this backstory because, they've done other things for work and everything. But the fruit didn't really fall far from the tree, I found out. Like, these are my interests. And I got it, in my opinion, from my family and my immigrant experience coming from China to America as well. It just became very clear early on that how important it was to use your voice and to speak for yourself. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Yeah. So that's kind of my early origin story about why I care about writing. And then when I started doing coaching and doing coaching training, I'm an ontological coach, which is always a mouthful. But I really like being able to support people in a one-on-one capacity.
Sure.
In ways that I kind of wish I had when I was going through school and when I was a teenager trying to explore how to be creative, but also having these voices being hammered in, like you have to be able to make money, you have to be able to figure this out, you have to learn all these other things that you don't quite understand when you're a kid, what people are talking about. Coaching was like a great way to bridge the gap of hearing people's stories, having conversations with them, and then also giving them and offering them support to get to where they want to go. And that's the same thing of writing a book. You don't really know where it's going to be at the end, ultimately. After speaking with a lot of writers, because I did a lot of research period where I just spoke with writers, be like, tell me your...
on your podcast too. So
yeah.
Just hear that enchantment process, or not all of it's always enchanting, but most of it is.
I guess that's close to the honest experience for writers, the ups and downs. Anyways, from that, I'm creating this program and also just offering space to work with artists and creatives. You don't have to call yourself a writer necessarily to be working on a book. There are many reasons to do that. But yeah, I definitely come from, I guess, the heart space, as we like to say. And this is like an early thing, writing, listening to music, playing the piano. That was in my life.
So many of my listeners are high performers. I've spent so many years in the corporate space and building my own business. So I have a lot of entrepreneurs, high performers, and whatever. But I also have a lot of creatives. And I think, and I also know because I've experienced it, that so many of the people that are kind of like what I'm referring to as high performers, whether they're working for a corporation or they're a leader or the entrepreneur, they're creatives on the inside. And so I would love to hear your perspective on the value of working with your inner artist and the payoffs that has, the benefits that it might have. In case there's someone listening that's like, oh, I wish I had time for my art craft, or like, I wish I had time to write, or I wish you should, is always my perspective. But like, let's talk about that. I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I would say when I was speaking with every writer, I asked them what got in their way. Classic question. And the number one answer by far is not enough time. Are you surprised by this?
No, not at all. Time is always, I'm like, what are you going to do? Wait till you retire? What if something happened? And like you said, like,
Yeah,
what if you got in a tragic accident? I don't want that to happen to all my listeners. I'm just saying. But what
absolutely. But
if?
it's true.
But what if?
No, it's
What if
true.
you didn't get to express yourself? So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think some people could be discouraged by this, but I actually found it very encouraging that whether it was a published author who, by I guess normal standards, is quite accomplished, known, has achieved quite a bit, to like the writers who haven't even started, they've just been aspiring writers. Issue was the same. It didn't make any difference. Whether you were accomplished, you were busy, as it turns out. So I actually got some comfort in that doesn't really determine or control the outcome of what's going to happen with your ideas and your books and everything. More so just that take some comfort in you're not alone. And if other people have been able to figure it out, you can too. I saw a clip recently of Martha Beck talking about creativity, and it really connected with me because she talked about creativity as being the opposite end of the spectrum from anxiety. And
Oh, I've never
so,
heard her talk. I like Martha Beck and her work too, but I've never
yeah,
seen that.
she has been doing some interview rounds and she started talking about creativity in this way. And I hadn't heard of that myself either, but it makes sense to me, meaning when I've been really impacted by anxiety, feeling
Yeah.
stagnant, feeling unhappy at work, overwhelmed, my creativity was very low, or I couldn't really emotionally or mentally connect to it. You know what I'm saying?
I do. That's why I wanted to talk about it. Yeah, because I think people who are on that everyday grind might not just even consider that it's a thing that could help them.
Yeah. So I often think about the way that writers anchor their practice and their creativity as a result of that. Meaning, are you trying to get out of creativity or writing a book the same expectations that's got you burnt out at work? Or are you doing this because you know you have anxiety and you need to take care of your well being? And you can tell how anxious you are or where you're at in your well being by sitting down and trying to be creative and things like that. So, I've just found that there are so many different reasons to be creative. And it's more so just getting down and getting as close as possible to what the person needs. Is it more freedom? Is it more space? Is it genuinely more time? Because if so, there are some technical things we can look at. For example, look at the writers in your market or your arena who's really busy and you know to be busy and see what they're up to. But really, I think at the end of the day, it's just finding ways to connect with the things you have to say, perhaps outside of anxiety a little bit, especially in this year that we're talking.
I love that so much. And I love the connection between anxiety and creativity kind of being like a yin and yang to each other because you got a chance to interview me about a return to radiance, but my brother passed away when I was in the second edits and talk about anxiety and just being off. And I remember everyone asking me if I was going to be able to continue writing, if I was going to be able to finish it, even the publisher, right?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
Are you even going to have the capacity to do it? And I just bring that up because it actually ended up being like the gift to myself to get me through that. And the writing, I think, saved me. And so I love what you're saying about just still doing the work, regardless kind of where you are. And I do believe in like what Martha Beck, I'd love to see that interview too. But what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that creativity can help pull you out of anxiety. It can help pull you out of depression. It can help. And I think because we were talking before we hit record, I think there's a magicness that happens when you invoke your inner artist, whether you're a musician or a writer or you like to act or you like to garden. But what do you think the magic of art has to do to a person, like that inner magic?
First of all, I love that question. The first thing that came up for me was just doing things instead of expectation, doing things according to giving yourself what you need. Does that make sense? I'm sure you've seen this with your parents. I've heard many magical things about them from our interview, but it's just like, when you're trying to get there or when you're trying to come up with something good, how difficult that is. In fact, it gets in the way of letting something happen. And then you see it when you're able to just take that pressure off and focus on something else, focus on something in the present. I would say I'm better at this with music than I am with writing. I can be in my head for sure. But it goes back to the same thing of why do you need this? I understand that people are very busy and people don't have to write, but I also understand that everyone has a voice and therefore everyone probably has something to say. If you don't have something to say or you don't believe that, then I guess you don't need to write. You can be a reader, and I think that's wonderful. But it goes back to what do you need from this moment or this session or this next 30 minutes that you're going to be writing, and maybe take it something beyond your expectations. One of the magical things is like you don't know where you're going to end up,
Ooh,
but
that's giving me
often,
goosebumps. It's so cool to follow that creative process.
yeah, but it can work out for us nonetheless, and you can get what you want. And I think for a lot of us, that's incredibly healing to be able to trust the process and trust the universe. When I think I've spoken to a lot of people, the reason why we're not creative, we're afraid to write something or post something, is not being able to trust that things are going to be okay or that something bad's going to happen.
Your
Or
inner critic is up.
I understand I took some time off over the holidays. I lost a cat. For many people, that's like their kid, right? Yeah. And I was worried that it was going to take away from the things I had already committed to, right? The work. And I was like, gosh, this is going to feel so heavy. How do I transform this? But it was the opposite.
See,
Engaging.
I'm glad that you're mentioning that too, because people thought that I was crazy that I stayed committed to the writing process after my brother passed. But it was so healing, and it actually gave for my soul and for my spirit, it gave me an uplifting feeling when I needed it the
Yes.
most.
100%. And that is to me the magic of doing something that you enjoy so much without any ulterior motives. You just like what you're doing right now. Does that make sense? So it's so rare these days, I think, because we have a lot of obligations, we have a lot of responsibilities. But to me, the people that really stick with a creative practice is they've been able to use the space to give them what they're lacking. It could be joy, it could be freedom, it could be just not having to think about the outcome all the time. Whatever it is, you can customize this creative space however you want. And I really believe in that.
I do too. And so I want to ask you a question like, how could leveraging their inner creative, if the listeners are like inspired by our conversation, they're like, yeah, what's next? Let's talk about how these tools can empower their life or this mindset of allowing your inner creative to have a seat within you.
This goes back to my research period where I was just kind of using it as a reason to connect with, my favorite people anyway. But what was really fun is just asking them what got in their way of creativity. Number one was time, but number two, I think, would be something close to feeling like your voice has no value, basically.
Yes. No, but let's talk about that because
Yeah.
we started off the pre-recording talking about like, but that's like your voice has value. Maybe that's what
Yeah.
we'll name this episode. I don't know, but I think that's really important because when the work I do, because so much of my stuff is like trauma informed and starting off and trying to help people transition into their potential, we're obviously kind of starting in like the beginning of the ick, is that you really start to find out that they don't feel that they have the external value.
Yeah, that's right. It's the external picture we have planted about authorship, about who deserves to be on top of the list of the published and everything, right? Who deserves to talk
right? Or like,
about.
who am I to write about this? Or there's already 5 experts on this topic. Who am I to like try to write about it also? Or there's already a successful novel series on something that I was going to write about or whatever. Well, you know what? You're you. That is your uniqueness. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but I love what you just said about your voice having value and then like your uniqueness also.
Well, because I think a lot of people talk about they're not creative enough or they're not good enough. But the more I work with people, the more I speak with people, the less I can define good writer to me versus completing this poem. It gets very, very difficult, and it's all built around these internal narratives we have about what we have to offer the world, the outside, because I understand that a lot of us started with writing, some of us anyway, literally to feel better because we needed an outlet. We needed something that could help ground us and center us during times of deep struggle. I know so many people who have these moments, but I think people have sometimes when we have that, we're like, well, how does that connect with business or publishing or submissions or contests? And there's all this other stuff start coming in. But I think it's one and the same. If you have something to say that provided a service to you, then it can provide a service to other people. I think we get confused in that the things that make us quote unquote feel better, therefore are useless to other people. But I found that to be quite the opposite. They're
I
often the
love
places,
what you're saying so
yeah, the thing that gives us things that we need can also be the same place as that of offering service. It's one and the same.
yeah,
But I feel like there's a
I
lot of
think
like,
that, you're just triggering some like myself, but if you think of the Renaissance period of art and music, I think so much of the artistry that came out of that period of time was because people were, well, they were in the Renaissance. So there was like an uplifting from the previous period. But I think people were creating to create. Like Beethoven wrote his symphonies because they felt good to him, right?
he was
And
compelled to, you know what I mean?
yeah, like he was compelled to. He wasn't sitting there like, I want to be the best piano.
Yeah, do I want to or not? How badly do I want to versus this other thing? There was a level of just like, it's got to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think as you're talking, I'm smiling because I'm hoping the listeners can pick up some inspiration from this conversation is that allow yourself to connect with this part of you that wants to either write or play music or do something without an outcome attached to it. Because what Robert's saying is true is if it feels good to you, it's probably going to feel good to someone else. And who are you to hold back? What if your creative process, however that is, again, there's so many different forms of creativity, but what if the way that you express your thing is the very thing that might save someone's life? People don't understand how much art, how much writing, music truly saves people's lives. So I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but like,
I try to respectfully dabble in this territory because I don't want to claim as an expert, but the healing spaces is so vital for creativity. And I experienced this firsthand with my partner when they had really extensive surgery that required hospital stay, that
oh
required me to
yeah,
be there. Anyone who's gone through the medical system can relate to this, but they're wonderful. They have to be on for their job to do their thing for you. And that is so important. But it kind of means medical professionals have very little bandwidth to do the emotional connection, to do the caregiving that everybody needs for their anxiety when they're about to go through all these medical procedures. I now understand why there should be a divide. It's a lot for anyone to take on medically and then emotionally. But then I was happy with seeing some of the more modern developments that there was like meditation, sound healing available on the screen. They had a Reiki healer on rotation at NYU
no,
Langone.
so cool. Like that just blew my mind. I'm like, what?
I didn't know this until I witnessed it. Aromatherapy. They come in with all these different packets you can come. And because guess what? It helps the patient prepare for the medicine, for the work that's about to be done on them. As you can tell, I'm all for that. I would hope for more of that because it's a lot for a person to go through a big experience like that. And
Sure.
similarly, I would say with writing, doing things like meditation, or tapping into my intuition, like we've talked about. I don't know that it necessarily made me a better writer, but it was able to support and befriend my inner critic. And that made writing just a much more enjoyable experience for me because truthfully, it's not like it's always fun, right? We get moments where we get stuck and everything, but it's
Oh
just
my gosh,
easier
yeah,
for me
water
to,
block happens and all that. So
yeah,
real. It's real.
yeah. And people are just like, oh my gosh, if that happens to me, that means something really bad, blah, 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 right? But again, I think it's just like staying with it, coming back to what do I need right now?
Oh, I love that. I'd love to just find out. It's oozing from you, but I would love to hear why you're passionate about being a writing coach. Let's talk about that.
Like I said, the fruit didn't fall far from that tree. So there's that aspect of my personal experience
Yes, sure.
affecting things, just having to learn different languages, having to navigate translating things and communication, miscommunication. That's a big part of it. But also now there's a statistic that's been going around, at least in what I'm seeing on social media, that close to about 60% of Americans can't read above a sixth grade level. It was something like that.
What? That blows my mind. I haven't seen
Yeah.
that yet, but wow.
It was like close to 60%. And when you hear things like that, as much as I believe in the power of writing, of creative expression and language, it doesn't really matter if people can't use it, does it?
No.
So there's something about now being just doggedly honoring this space for me that's really, really important because I believe in the power, but it has to be accessible to people. in order for the benefits to be experienced. So there's a little bit of that in trying to invite as many people who, again, have something to say to this space and to generate until one project at a time, right? Get into that vibe. And also the opportunity to do it inside of community and connection. I went to grad school for writing and I loved it. And I guess I would say I'm talented. But the biggest breakthroughs was actually just being in a group and getting feedback and taking down notes. And can I curse on this podcast? Just a little.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Like shoot the shit a little bit
Yeah.
and actually have people see you and hear you, what you have to say. It's very vulnerable, but I did that 5 days a week, every day. We had to present writing.
Oh, that's so good for your nervous system.
Yeah.
When I wrote my first book, I started off in a writer's group and there was like 6 of us, and we met 3 times a week and we had to share each other's writing and listen to it. But so by the time I actually like really had to pen to paper, so to speak, I had already gone through all these exercises, written short stories, all these different things, and kind of got that, like you're saying, that feedback loop in my nervous system, and which really prepared me to write more authentically and honestly, I think.
Yeah.
Some of that judgment noise of like, what are people going to say? Because I had a community, I got to test that out on myself.
Yeah. There's something
saying it because I think it's really important.
Oh, it so is. And, when you've experienced a really transformative or vital experience inside of a group like that, you kind of look for it everywhere. At least I do. And I know how special a really good writer space can be, right? So that's actually something I try to pay attention to when looking at different people's projects. And it's something close to about 6 people in a group because there's that level of intimacy and trust.
More than 6 of us, it probably would have been a challenge.
Yeah. So I definitely taking some things from my experience of the lecture hall setting and thinking about what a long book writing project would entail. But, when I did my research on like, how long did all these well-known authors, how long did it take for them to finish this piece of work and whatnot? It was about 6 months to a year. So it's very doable for everybody. But I noticed the people often, if they were in interviews and stuff, they would talk about their breakthroughs and light bulb moments being getting feedback from this person they trusted or from their writers group. These are the secret ingredients, in addition to your own talent and free will, that can really create magic out of your projects, basically.
1000%. So we're winding down. I knew this interview was going to go so fast. We have like 5 minutes left. I'm going to ask you a final question as we close out. I just want to open it up. Is there anything on your mind that you want to share with the listeners that I haven't asked you or that you haven't been able to share yet as it relates to this topic?
I would say write as if you're setting up the red carpet for your future. Everything you write now, yes, there is like how difficult is the project, the writer's block you're going through, or the inspiration that you're going through, and the feedback you're trying to get over. But as a coach, we're very future forward. Yes. So I would say really ponder what you want once this project is done or this book is completed. And also bring that into the writing spaces. I think that's like an organic way to introduce some of the writers are way better business people than we give ourselves credit for, but there's some kind of cultural stereotype about that. So just don't be afraid to think about these projects as like your stepping stone and your calling cards, and think about how you would use them. Maybe it sounds a little bit shallow to people, but if you have something to say, it should be elevated. And so again, just use your power, use your voice, intentionality, and see what happens. And also just like get support. Know that you're not alone. People's narratives are fairly similar as far as like,
you'll learn that as you become more vulnerable and figure out. You had mentioned it earlier in the interview, but you're like, you're really not alone. You'll find more people.
And even that will settle some of the, I like to say, crazy making. It's just like, oh, this is normal. This is part of it.
Crazy making. Because that's what we do. We drive ourselves crazy with the stories we tell ourselves.
It's like, well, of course. It's like when I've been in an office in front of my computer for 8 hours, of course, but when you get creative and you let yourself go there and you find the people to make the time happen, it's not just about the work of art. Ultimately, the art is about the impact it has on people. And this process is for the people. So I hope people enjoy writing and their voice a lot more in this year.
That's awesome. We're at a perfect point for me to say, if people want to stay in contact with you, how can they do so? Go ahead and share.
Yeah, so they can find me and my website, which is www.robertkuanghome.com, and that's spelled Kuang. It's also my Instagram handle, Robert Kuang Home, and you can also find me on places like LinkedIn, Blue Sky under my name. You can DM me, or if you go through my website, you can email me to connect. Especially if you got a project, like
Let's
believe it,
go.
no one gets a book done by themselves. That is a lie created by very lucky men once upon a time.
Yeah,
No
no,
one does it by
I
themselves.
have
So
multiple people.
yeah, we all do. It's not a secret. So it's like, it's great. The more the merrier. Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. So one last question before we sign off.
Yes.
And all of that will be in the show notes too, guys, if you just want to quick link everything. But your last question, because it's the empowered half hour. What is an empowering message you can sign off with for the audience?
I'm going to go back to voice, I suppose. I'm quite cheesy today, but whatever. As someone who has been supported through a lot of healing and grief through honoring my ancestors and where I come from and all of that, I would say your voice is not just representing you. So it's not to add pressure to it, but it's actually to add richness and depth to the thing that we call our voice. It is generated from a lot of history from generations before. Like I said, with my mom and my dad, they're still with me. They see me do my thing and they have their own story about it. But when I use my voice to write or to make music, I tell myself it's not just about me or for me, that there are all these people that had to live full lives in order for me to just play some music, to exist and play some music, generations. So I think of it from that way as well. And perhaps some people, especially if they want to write about personal experiences, can tap into that a little bit. I find that to be really powerful and healing.
Big cheeking over here, guys.
I know. I am preaching to the choir knowing your story.
But it's such, using your voice, especially in writing and in music, it's just such a way to honor not only yourself, but that ancestral backing. We've got a whole team of humans behind us that have come in for centuries before us. And then here we are.
Yeah. Guess who wants to honor your radiance also? Your brother,
Yes.
for sure. It's for everyone.
Well, thank you for coming on my podcast.
Yeah, this was fun. Yeah, we should do more of this in the future just to catch up with each other.
It'd be